What is the first item that comes to mind when I say bushcraft? You might have said a knife, some may have said a ferro rod, but in this video I will talk about 5 essential bushcraft items that every camper or bushcrafter should have. Here I have a tarp, and this is the first item on this list. A tarp is a very light and reliable piece of gear that is easy to set up if you know what you are doing. Really, all you need to know is a couple of knots, and you can then get pretty creative with what you make with the tarp. For example, I made this tarp shelter with a guideline and some stakes. To tie the guideline, I used a taut line hitch, which is tied like this. It's super simple because it's basically just a double overhand knot, but you make one more loop and put the tag end through that loop. On the other side, I used a trucker's hitch, which allows you to really tighten the guideline. The trucker's hitch is basically a slip knot further up the guideline, but twisted 3 times. And then you put the line through and pull. After the guideline is made, I just throw a tarp over it. After that, I stake down the corners on the back, which is the side that is going to be closed. And since we want the front open, we're going to prop that up. I do that by simply pounding a stick into the ground and then tying a taut line hitch to that to tighten the roof. To tighten the other side, I just used a tree and cinched it tight from there. For the middle, I also tied it to a tree, but it's not necessary, and I don't think you need to tie off the middle. And there you have the shelter, super easy to set up and proves that a tarp is a great piece of equipment. The next item on this list is a knife. All I have is this 4-inch Bushcraft Bushcraft Black, but having a big knife is definitely better because you can do bigger things like chop a branch, for example. Although your average size knife can split most logs by batoning. In fact, you can get through some pretty big logs with your knife, depending on the wood. Remember that knives are not indestructible, so don't do this too often. A knife I typically use is this Mora, which is a partial tang which looks like this. I obviously recommend full tang knives so you can do heavier duty things, like baton, and even chop, which is not necessary for knives to do, but it is still helpful. But I will say the Mora is an exception. As long as it fits these 3 conditions, then it's a good knife. First is that it's sharp. This may seem obvious, but having a sharper knife reduces the struggle when cutting things, reducing the amount of energy used and reducing the risk of accidentally cutting yourself. Second is durability. You obviously want a fixed blade and not a pocket knife, because the tasks you do in the woods take a lot more than your average EDC task. And finally, it fits the environment in your situation. Want to go ultralight? A smaller knife with a lighter steel would be good. Going to the jungle? A machete would be proper there. Overall, a knife is a vital part of equipment. And now for a bonus item. One of my keyboard warriors pointed out that I need something to carry all this stuff in. If that wasn't obvious enough, this is like saying that I need to include what I ate for breakfast as an item in the video. So, I decided to include a backpack as an essential item, as that is much more convenient than lugging all your gear by hand. But on to the third item, which is a ferro rod. I'm also going to include a gas stove in here, but I'm not going to go too in depth because I already have a video about it. Go watch that if you're interested. Using a ferro rod is pretty easy. I typically like to pull the rod towards myself so that I don't mess up my tender bundle. But for some things, like this char cloth, you don't need to do that and you can strike towards it. A fire starter I use a lot is fat wood because it is very common where I live. It can be found in dead stumps of a pine tree and in the base of a branch of fallen ones. Here is a fire that I started with a ferro rod. I started by throwing sparks on some fat wood scrapings, and then I added a bunch of twigs on top. Really, it does not matter what fire starting item you use as long as it works well. For the fourth item, it is going to be a first aid kit. They are pretty small and there is no excuse not to have one. As a little reference, here's what I carry in it. Some triple antibiotic ointment, unlabeled pills that should probably be labeled, but I know the red ones are ibuprofen and the pink packaged ones are Benadryl. The ibuprofen will be used for headaches and other pain, and the Benadryl will help with allergies or if you need to go to bed. I also carry 2 very large adhesive wound bandages. I think these are band-aids, but they could also be gauze pads. Some sterile water that will flush wounds of any dirt. Some medical tape for gauze that won't stick or anything else that needs tape. A pair of tweezers, which I found helpful for picking out splinters or handling really small things. Assorted bandages including these 3 big ones and a handful of other ones varying in size. This thing of either breathable tape or very sticky gauze because it is very sticky. Some gauze pads. Your basic bandage. Some medical scissors for cutting gauze or tape. This weird needle thing along with these safety pins. And all of that fits in here, so there really is no excuse to not have one. It would also be good to throw a tourniquet in here, but I'm sure you could just use paracord. The last item is, well, cordage. I went over on how to tie some knots in another video, but tying a taut line hitch is pretty simple. It starts off with a double overhand knot, and then you just make another one on top, making sure to go behind and over the main rope. Then put your rope in. I really like this knot, but since I mentioned a tarp before, it would be very hard to set up a tarp without cordage. It may be possible, but I like as much cordage as possible when setting one up. But that about makes it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and if you did, please like and subscribe. Go ahead and click in this video here to see more of my bushcraft gear, and for any of you guys who thought I missed anything. Anyway, peace.